U.S. warplanes are back in Iraq. But this time it might actually be for a good reason. Now, why in the world would I say that? U.S. warplanes attacking targets in Iraq, and I think that it might be a good thing? What in the hell kind of world are we in? I'll explain. Now, this has to do with refugees fleeing what's known as, or what was known as, ISIS. Now, they're the Islamic State, trying to set up a caliphate, doing all sorts of crazy shit. This group, particular group, is actually called the Yazidi. Now, I want to get into what the Yazidi, who they are, what they believe, in a little bit. But first, Raw Story reported earlier today that U.S. jets struck jihadist positions in northern Iraq near the Kurdish region. Now, that's the towns of Guer and Makhmur, and it destroyed a few pieces of militant artillery. Interesting fact about that militant artillery, we'll get into that later. This comes, of course, after a UN Security Council meeting called by France, of all people, in order to fight the Islamic State and also to contribute to relief efforts for some of the refugees in the area. Now, so already, what we know now is that we're back in Iraq and we're doing airstrikes on particular targets near the Kurdish region, which is mostly autonomous. And the Kurdish Peshmerga has been fighting with IS militants there for a while. So we're back there. We're doing the strikes. What do you guys think so far? And we'll start with you, Steven.
Well, I mean, it's so much for Operation Withdrawal. I mean, I know that Obama did actually want to keep some troops in Iraq for a number of years, and the Iraqis just said, no, we don't want to kind of keep any of your troops here. It does seem, like you said, it's counterintuitive that you're bombing people to save lives. For me personally, I probably wouldn't have gone and bombed kind of IS or ISIS, whatever they're kind of being referred to in the press now. Most people are just calling them IS. I'd have just done kind of the humanitarian welfare, kind of dropped off the food parcels, the water, and then, maybe kind of, I don't know if you could airlift 40,000 people off a mountain to some safer region, because the Yazidis are essentially just trapped on top of a mountain. But I suppose at the end of the day, I wouldn't like to have had to have bombed IS here, but I suppose Obama didn't really have that much more of a choice. He had to have acted, otherwise Republicans would have called him weak, but no doubt they're going to criticize him for this anyway somehow.
Right. So what were you saying earlier about the artillery? Now, you brought up a good point in the pre-show meeting.
Yeah, in the pre-show meeting, I was saying it's somewhat ironic in that the US is now, the first airstrike was reportedly on a mobile artillery that was shelling nearby towns in that region, and no doubt that mobile artillery was given to the Iraqi army that then ISIS took a hold of a couple months ago. But that artillery was given to the Iraqi army most likely by the American government, or the American government certainly paid for it somehow, has some link to it. So now the Americans are in some way bombing their own equipment, and of course it's not kind of, that hasn't been proven yet that it was kind of American produced artillery. But odds are America is now bombing their own equipment, and this is brilliant news for the kind of industrial complex, military industrial complex out in America. Now they're destroying their own equipment that they're going to have to replace. So it's a win-win for kind of neocons out in the US.
Yeah, that's a pretty devastating point. Sean, weigh in.
Okay, so I'm probably maybe the most non-interventionist person on this panel, and I do actually like the limited bombing of ISIS around that mountainous region and bombing their artillery that they've gotten basically from us. Like, we gave the Iraqi army that equipment, and they seized it from them. So like it's like ISIS is created, or they are so heavily armed because of the U.S. government, and it makes logical sense that we should take care of the problems that we sowed in that country. But my issue is like, when does it stop? We've been bombing Iraq like ever since Desert Storm. Like we did the Desert Storm invasion. We bombed Iraq through the entirety of the Clinton administration. Then we invaded Iraq in the Bush administration. Obama pulled out, but we still had a gigantic military base there. Like, eventually, I want the intervention to stop, even though like there were people cornered on a mountain, and one of the bombing campaigns, that I think the second one, was directed to help those people. It's just like, when are we gonna, like, we created so many problems with bombings. I just feel like this will end up creating more, even if there is a temporary good done.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, the whole idea of this whole thing is we were the one that kind of caused the whole mess. Not kind of caused. We caused the whole mess in Iraq that led up to ISIS being so powerful. And so, you know, we caused that ironically from our bombing, and now we're bombing to try and save the people that we fucked over originally. It's a really shitty, difficult situation for all the refugees, especially these Yazidi. Now, I want to go into a little bit more about who the Yazidi are, and they're sort of a fascinating faith, which actually predates both Christianity and Islam. They're about 4,000 years old. They take elements from both religions, both Islam and Christianity, and they take a lot of their stuff from Zoroastrianism. And the reason that these people, these Yazidi, are in trouble is because IS is threatening to wipe them out because they're not Muslim, right? So according to The Guardian and local officials in Iraq, there's at least 500 Yazidis, including 40 children, have been killed, unfortunately, and many more have been threatened with death. Roughly 130,000 residents of the Yazidi stronghold of Sinjar have fled to a place called Dohuk, and that's in Iraqi Kurdistan to the north, or to a place named Erbil, whatever. The Yazidis, like I said, they're considered devil worshippers by Islamic fundamentalists, because they worship something called the peacock angel, which apparently was some sort of fallen angel, but then was forgiven. Blah. It's complicated and sort of ridiculous, but in my opinion, most religions are. Actually, all religions are a bit ridiculous. But their differences certainly aren't worthy of being murdered over it. Nonetheless, I think that doing a limited bombing campaign, as we're doing right now, is about the only option that we seem to have to help this minority group from being massacred by IS, which we helped create and helped get, become so powerful, especially since they now have our weapons.
Okay, it just seems that, I mean, you're right that bombing ISIS pretty much was the only option that the Obama administration had, because you couldn't put troops in. Let's say if they sent in troops and they completely decimated kind of the ISIS army, because that's what it essentially is now, it is an army, and they've certainly got enough people on the ground. If you wipe down that army, then that's just going to leave a void, and then another group is going to fill that void. It could be more extreme, it could be less extreme, but it will just create another void. I think one interesting thing, when Obama announced that he was going to do this bombing run, he said that one of the reasons that he kind of wanted to try and help the Yazidis who were stuck on the mountain was because ISIS, he accused them of attempting the systematic destruction of an entire people, which would constitute genocide. And whilst that is true, and I don't want to go off on a completely different tangent, I know it's been we've covered it elsewhere in previous weeks, but that's almost kind of what Israel's trying to do to Palestinians at the moment, that they are trying to systematically destroy an entire kind of nation. Whether its people are there or not, I don't think that matters to them. But I think at least it was good that Obama did use the term genocide in this, because that's pretty much the strongest condemnation. I haven't read anywhere that the UN has called it genocide, but I imagine that if push came to shove, some of their ambassadors would come out and say that it is genocide. But yeah, it's just a really sad state of affairs that America has gotten itself into. You've essentially you've been forced into this position where you're having to bomb for peace.
Yeah, I think that somehow Gaza would sneak into this, and to avoid getting off on a tangent. I think you're right, Stephen. I think I'll agree with you on that, and I'll leave it there. But Sean, if you want to give us your last thoughts on this.
Sure. On the Israel Gaza thing, I'm not going to get into a big argument over it. I think there's a difference because the Israelis want to break the Gazans like back essentially, but not necessarily massacre all of them. And ISIS is trying to like massacre a bunch of people. So there is a difference between the two. But the thing the thing I wanted to point out about this intervention is that like it kind of helps ISIS. It hurts ISIS in the short term. But I feel like all these interventions help radicals in the long term because they're going to say, look, the U.S. is bombing us like cowards. They're not coming here to face us. And they use that as like a rallying cry. So I feel like there are consequences for it. Like if we could just like save the Yazidi and like send them the Kurds way and then, you know, kind of not be involved anymore, like Turkey and Iran and Iran are actually natural enemies of ISIS, and they're in the region. And like, not to be a dick or anything, but that's their problem. And to Steven's point about bombing for peace, there's a great phrase that basically goes, "Killing for peace is like fucking for chastity." Like it doesn't work that